I'm going to try and solve a problem that a lot of people had. What premium pet to pick? And there's 3 currently. You got dragons, phoenixes, and seedlings. And I got to use them all at one time or another, so I'll try and let you know what they're good for. And we'll start with dragons. The green dragon's poison, red fire, blue ice, black magic. The green one, being poison, does less damage than the other elemental ones. So the green one will see less use endgame, but it does have certain purposes like, I don't know, PvP, possibly locking things, especially in Karamore. And we'll look at the stats on a tier 6. So you see that they got Strength, Dex, Focus, Vit, all 120. Kinda like a Sunfire Helm. Critical strike and skills of 1000, but if you remember that video I did a long time ago, you'll remember that critical skills and strike, the ability doesn't increase critical by that much. It's still something though, so keep it in the back of your mind. But all these stats here, don't really worry about them. That's not the big draw of these pets. And I know it's a lot of stats, but by end game, they're going to be plateaued a lot. So the more important thing here is the skill. And we'll take a quick look at the skill, just to show you. Now keep in mind this is a tier 2, so this isn't what a tier 6 is going to look like. So it does an initial hit in 6 meters, and a DOT on all the things that it hits for 15 seconds. 15 seconds on a DOT means 3 total hits. 5, 10, 15 seconds. When you level up the ability, you gain more initial damage, but not more damage over time. And another thing, the initial hit can hit a critical, damage over time can't. The only way to increase damage over time is to get a higher tier dragon, and they'll also increase the initial hit too. And the skill lasts for 15 seconds, and it also cools down in 15 seconds. So it could be constantly on the enemy at all times. But there is one drawback. Since it is a DOT skill, it can be overridden by the same tier or a higher tier dragon. If someone has a different element dragon, it'll stack. But if it's the same element, no. It'll either not apply DOT, or it'll override it. So just keep that in mind if you're gearing as a clan or anything like that. What the dragon's good for is a good well-rounder for DPS. It does a lot of things good and you can't really go wrong with it. I guess we'll jump to Phoenix now. Red does poison damage, orange fire, blue ice, purple magic. Pretty straightforward. We'll look at a red Phoenix. So we got a focus and vit of 240, only 2 stats, but they're doubled down. Fortitude and warding, 1000. Those are the best evasion types, and if you know how the ability works, you know that 1000 fortitude translates to 500 physical attack evasion, and 1000 warding is 500 spell attack evasion. We got 190 resist all and 250 resist poison. Depending on the Phoenix you pick, it'll have a different specialty. Like red being poison gives you more poison resist, the fire one will give you more resist heat, for example. And it also changes how the skill works. So we will show you the skill. Drop that on real quick. So it does damage in an area of 6 meters and also debuffs the enemy for 15 seconds. Leveling up the ability will level up the initial hit. It will not change the debuff. The skill will last for 15 seconds, but the cooldown's 25, so go 10 seconds without having the debuff. Also, it's still subject to the rule of being overridden by same type Phoenixes. Another note here, the only way to increase the debuff is to get a higher level Phoenix. A little unfair thing here. A tier 6 red Phoenix will reduce armor by 300, but an elemental tier 6 will reduce their resistance by 400. I think they did that to balance out the fact that armor is 3 different physical resists, But as a melee, you're very unlikely to do more than one type of damage, and I don't think they should be penalized for it. It's just weird. We all know that most people use pierce damage, so it's just making slash and crush even worse than it already is. I mean, I know crush is good, but that's only because of rupture. But the point stands. It's just like Dragon Lord armor for mages giving less fire and ice magic than the nature magic on Dragon Lord for druids. Anyway, Phoenixes, they are good for tanking because they have a crap ton of it and the best evasions and a bunch of resistances too. But it's also good for soloing because some classes don't have access to resist or armor reduction, like rogues, rangers, druids. They'll benefit from it, DPS wise. And for warriors, it's especially good because it stacks with shatter. But once you're in a boss fight where mages are casting lures for you, it kind of loses its edge. So just take that into account. And it's really OP for PvP. I mean, that's why I have it for both my alts. Because duels last short times, you don't need to worry about the 10 seconds that the effect's not up most of the time. And lastly, we'll look at the Seedlings. Blaze Root's fire, got ice, magic, poison, and some armory one. We'll look at Blaze Root first. Now, I don't actually have one, but I did play around with it in beta, so I'll just let you know my opinion. Strength, dex, heat damage. Immediately, you know that this is amazing for melees. And it also has 1,000 reflex and vigor, which is crappy evasions, but it's still something. And the skill will give an aura around your character, but here's the catch. It doesn't affect you. It only affects the people around you. So I guess that's why they put the heat damage on it. Now, the effect isn't on the whole time with the aura, but when it is on, if you can get a bunch of people around you, it's amazing for raids. Let me give you an example here. Let's say the tier 6 skill increases heat damage by 100, and you get 20 people around you, and let's say it lasts 20 seconds because I forget how long it lasts. And we'll say that the attack speed's 2,000. 20 seconds, 2,000 speed, that's 10 hits. 10 times 100 is what? 10 times 100, that's 1,000. And if you have 20 people, 1,000 times 20, that's 20,000 damage from one skill. Crazy OP. And definitely a mile better than the other two for raids. But for other uses, it might fall short. But one benefit that it does have is that if you die, you still keep the effects. Your friends may lose it, but you keep your effects. Another thing, Seedlings. The poison one does less damage. No real surprise. But if you're trying to get the maximum amount of DPS out of a raid as possible, you would ideally have all 4 damage types. Because we know that buffs can't stack on themselves, but you could stack different elements. So if you have all 4 up and say, let's say they total out to 350 damage between all of them, and you have 20 people, that would jump to, what, like 70,000 damage? That's how you take down the big ones. At least it's a pretty good idea in theory, but I've never seen anyone try it before. And lastly, we have Salve Root, which trades its strength for Vit. Still the same crappy things, but it gives 250 resist all of these physical types, which is basically 250 armor, but it's not affected by armor licks. And you may say, this is the best tank mount. I know it has all these great stats that the Phoenix doesn't have. And I mean, I can't really argue with the stats, but the skill, in theory, will give the same amount, roughly, as the pet itself for other people. So ideally, you wouldn't have this on a tank. You'd have it on a druid to buff the tank, and the tank would use the red phoenix for the elemental resists and the better evasions. Whether or not you want to spend that much money for 2 premium pets as opposed to 1 is up to you, but that's just how to do it optimally and perfect. So a little recap here. Phoenixes are good for soloing stuff with DPS, and they're good for tanks and PvP. Seedlings are good for supporting an entire raid, maybe a few friends, but it's questionable if they're the best DPS pet or not. A dragon's likely better for that. But if you want to fight at raids and help the whole group, Seedling's definitely the best way to go. And dragons are a well-rounded thing, and they're also probably good for lock battles, because here's the thing, even though the Phoenix hits more on the initial hit, with a slightly longer lock battle or bigger fight in general that causes a lock to go on for longer, you'd want to go for the dragon, because it's the only premium pet not to help your enemies. Because the Seedling, if you use that buff, all of the people around you will get it. It could be rival clans, it could be your clan. Same thing with the Phoenix and the resist down and whatnot. It helps the enemies too. But the dragon purely helps you, because it only puts your damage up there. And you can get bonus points if you have the same element dragon as another rival clan's person, because after they cast their skill, you can cast yours and override their DOT, and get twice the amount of damage because, well, not really, but you steal their potential damage and add your own, so it's kind of like that for locking purposes. And that's my opinion on the premium pets. And it's nice that they're balanced, that they all have a purpose for something.